This is Deborah Atkinson, and you're listening to Flipping 50, where I answer your biggest questions and your struggles. I share what to eat, how to move, and how to think so you can have the energy and the vitality you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. Of all the things we're thinking of in 2020 during COVID-19, our hormone balance, our muscles, and our bone density concerns don't disappear. And that's why I've got my guest today with me. Susan Brady brings a rich diversity of experience and knowledge to the healthcare profession. She's been a licensed physical therapist for over 30 years and is also a doctor of integrative medicine and nutrition consultant. Susan specializes in helping women with osteoporosis through a holistic treatment approach. Her Bones method is a unique and integrative approach that assesses and addresses all aspects of bone health. Susan is also the host of the upcoming Healthy Aging Summit, which will offer expert advice on how you can live your healthiest and most vibrant life at every and any age. Susan, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, Deborah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be speaking with you.
Well, okay, so to keep this real, I feel like we have to just talk for a moment about literally how are you doing in all of this?
In terms of COVID-19 and the home quarantine?
Yes.
Yes. I actually am doing pretty well. Other than not being able to go to the store on a whim, my work really hasn't changed that much. I am able to meet with all of my clients virtually, take care of their testing and supplement needs. I have, a home full of loving people, and we're actually really enjoying being together. We've had a lot of fun getting on Zoom with my mother-in-law and playing Scrabble on the weekend nights, which is great. We put her on Zoom, and then she has her Scrabble board in Florida where she lives, and she puts all the tiles down. And so, it's kind of interesting how we have all learned to connect in different ways. So, yes, is it a hardship that we can't just go out on a whim? Absolutely. But you know what? There's also a lot of silver linings to this as well. And I think the biggest thing is connecting and finding other ways to connect with people and appreciating the connection when we do make it.
I love that. So much fun. We've had a few Saturday night live Zooms with my family as well, so I can totally resonate with some of that.
Yeah.
And so thanks for that moment of reality, because I think it's important that we address this piece of it while we also fully recognize that, we are going to come out of this, that these immediate concerns we've got for all of our listeners, concerns about bone density, about good health for the decades ahead of us, that we are going to enjoy again in the freedom that we're used to having it. All of those things are important. So I want to come back to you and the work that you're doing. Really want to dive into your Bones method. But first, I want to know, why are you doing what you're doing? What's your why? Why practice on treating women in osteoporosis specifically?
Yeah. Well, I started my career out as a physical therapist, as you mentioned, and then went on and got degrees in integrative medicine and nutrition. And when I first opened my private practice, I kind of felt like I was a jack of all trades. I was working with a lot of different people with all different kinds of health conditions, which was fun. But also, it's hard to keep up, on the latest in research and literature and treatment approaches when you have such a wide scope of practice. And I would say several years into my practice, I started to really get an influx of women coming in that have osteoporosis and wanted to avoid taking the osteoporosis medications and, looking for a more natural approach to treating their bone loss. So that's when I really started to dive into the research and the literature on osteoporosis. And what I found was that to have, having healthy bones goes way beyond just getting enough calcium and vitamin D and walking 30 minutes a day. And there are
Amen.
and there are so many things that can impact our bone health, like systemic inflammation, digestion, stress. And so you truly have to take a whole body approach to building bone. So that's what I do.
So good. So I'm going to kind of sit with the hat of my listener, or the visor of my listener, as it were, and ask questions. So number one, I think a woman may be asking this because we've taken for granted that, of course, it's common knowledge. We lose bone as we age. And yet, to the woman who's listening, who's thinking, okay, well, wait a minute, why is that? Why do we lose bone as we age? And, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about that, because I think a lot of women will assume isn't losing bone just a normal part of the aging process. But let's start with why. Why are we losing it?
Yeah, well, the truth is that bone health actually begins during our adolescent years, because that's the time of life when we're actively building our bone mass. And we only build bone mass until about the age of 25. And that's when a person reaches what we call our peak bone mass. So that's the most bone that you're ever going to have. And so through our 30s and our 40s, if you take care of yourself, your bone mass stays stable. But then later in your 40s, early 50s, that's when we actually start to lose bone. And the reason is because we start to go through menopause. And through menopause, we experience a decline in estrogen. And estrogen is very bone protective. So for that first part of our life, when we are making estrogen, it's protecting our bone cells and preventing bone loss. But then when we go through menopause, and we get a decline in estrogen levels, we lose that protection. And that's when we start to see the bone loss. So yes, bone loss to some extent is part of the normal aging process. And it is typical that a person will lose some bone during menopause. And I'd say most bone loss occurs within the first 5 to 10 years after menopause. So let's go back to those adolescent years. Those teenagers, if they're living a healthy lifestyle, eating right, exercising, taking care of themselves as a teenager, you're going to lay down a lot of bone. You're going to reach that peak bone mass. So now, later in life, when you go through menopause and you lose some of that bone, you might not go into osteoporosis. That bone decrease, you'll get a little bit of decrease in bone mass, but it's not going to put you in osteoporosis. But if you were someone that ate junk food diet, was a couch potato, maybe had a medical condition that impacted your health. A big one that we see is anorexia, these young girls with anorexia. You then don't reach that peak bone mass. So now later in life, when you go through menopause, even the slightest decline in bone mass puts you into osteoporosis. So for your listeners out there with teenage children or grandchildren, really, really important to encourage them to follow a healthy lifestyle for, all aspects of health, but for their bones as well. And unfortunately, most people don't even start to think about bones until later in life, when you do all of a sudden get a bone scan and now you have osteoporosis.
Yeah, so true, so true. And especially, depositing that bone and building it up until the point that you reach puberty can be even more important. So looking at, giving children things like jump ropes, and opportunities to actually play, have heel strike, jump, bounce, hop, all of those high impact things that you may have second thoughts about later in life are excellent for children to be doing to build that bone density. Looking at the quality of sports, swimming versus gymnastics, they're both wonderful for different reasons, but swimming is not going to build your bone density while gymnastics does.
Right. And then I think the other really important issue is, so, estrogen loss that occurs with menopause, well, that's responsible for what we call primary osteoporosis, but there can also be what we call secondary causes of osteoporosis. And so those are the typical health or lifestyle related causes for bone loss. So for instance, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, gastrointestinal diseases like inflammatory bowel disease or celiac disease, thyroid or parathyroid conditions, gastric bypasses can lead to osteoporosis. So when you staple off part of your stomach, you're removing a critical area of nutrient absorption. So you're not getting the nutrients needed to maintain bone health. And then obviously lifestyle factors such as smoking, sedentary lifestyle like you talked about, excessive alcohol intake, stress. So on top of just the normal loss of bone that's going to occur in everybody as we go through menopause, you then have these secondary related issues that can cause further bone loss. And the good news is these are things we have control over and we can do something about. We can stop smoking. We can be active. We can drink in moderation. We can certainly eat a healthy lifestyle or eat healthy foods. And those are lifestyle factors that are going to help maintain bone mass in our later years.
Such a great point. And I also like to bring people back around to the idea that during menopause we do lose bone or have the potential to lose bone, but we also have the potential to offset it. So let's kind of dive into your program. You have a unique integrative approach to addressing osteoporosis called the Bones Method. Love that. Can you tell us a little about the method for treating bone loss and or preventing it? So clarify, do you do both, and or is this for treatment once someone has been diagnosed?
I do it both. Obviously, prevention is the best medicine. So I'm a big fan of getting bone densities earlier, sooner rather than later, because if someone has a bone density test, a DEXA scan, which is the kind of gold standard for bone density, earlier at 48, 50 years old, we'll already get a very good idea of what their bone mass is prior to going into menopause. And there's a lot that then we can do to support and prevent excessive bone loss at that point in time. And then, if somebody doesn't have a DEXA scan until 60 or 70, and that is what the typical recommendation by the AMA is to wait until 60 years old to get a DEXA scan, we've already gone through menopause. We've already lost that bone. It is much harder at that point to, reverse or maintain bone mass. So
that is such a great point, Susan, and I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. So really all that we're doing when you have a bone density scan at 60 is we're confirming, yes, you've lost bone.
Yeah. Exactly.
But for listeners, I think it's important if we bring this up, and I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire. You're not in charge of insurance, but a good kind of question for listeners who may have this already is, will insurance cover a bone density scan for a woman who is in her early 50s or even late 40s, as opposed to later. Can you comment on that?
Yes, and it all comes down to the doctor, and when you're ordering a test, as long as there's kind of reasonable reasons why, then insurance will absolutely pay for it. However, what insurance won't do is pay for the yearly exam. So usually they'll pay for a DEXA scan every 2 years, not every year. And, that brings up a whole other host of problems, is because it's very hard to keep somebody motivated to eat right, exercise, take care of themselves in hopes of building bone when you're only getting scans every 2 years. And, somebody that is looking at weight loss or digestive issues or working on better sleep, you get satisfaction because you see progress. But it's very, there are no symptoms that are associated with osteoporosis, so it's very hard to see progress when you're only doing DEXA scans every 2 years. And that's why I use something called bone markers. And bone markers can assess the rate of bone turnover. So your bone is living tissue like any other tissue in the body. You're constantly laying down new bone cells and sloughing off old bone cells. And so these bone markers can assess the rate of bone turnover and the balance between bone formation and bone resorption, and it can tell us whether you're actively losing too much bone, and in some circumstances it can even tell you if you're building bone. So I really like to use these bone marker tests, and they can be done every 4 to 6 months. And so it's a great way to assess the effectiveness of your treatment plan, unlike a DEXA scan, which, again, you can only do every 2 years.
That is great information. Thanks for sharing that. I also want to touch on something that you said for listeners, because I know a lot of my community members, a lot of my audience often get confused about this. But you said something that's very key, in that osteoporosis has no symptoms. Like, a lot of women are misunderstanding that their bones will hurt if they have osteoporosis. So yeah. I want to kind of touch on that and clarify the fact that unless you are very far advanced and you have an incredible rounded upper back or thoracic spine, your bones are not going to hurt. You're not going to know that you're vulnerable or frail. So I love that you've mentioned that, but I want to call that out for listeners. And if you want to add anything to that, Susan, please do.
Well, the number one symptom of bone loss is a fracture. And again, none of us want to experience a fracture to find out that we have osteoporosis. And that's another reason why these tests are so important, because we want to address and start supporting our bone health before we get a fracture, or to prevent a fracture. So, that's why it's so important to get these tests done and to understand what's happening in your bones, because you're right, the only symptom is truly a fracture.
So good. And by that point, we already are confirming things are very advanced. Okay. Yes. So question here, I think, is that if a DEXA scan, if you have one, your insurance will cover, but really at interims that aren't very helpful or supportive of you sticking with your program, continuing to follow through and feeling good, knowing that you're doing the right thing. Cost. Do you have any indication, Susan? And I know it may vary depending on where you are, and you may not know this, but do you have any idea how much does a DEXA scan cost if somebody were going to pay that out of pocket?
They're actually not that expensive. I believe they're $200 or $300 out of pocket.
Okay.
Where if you go through insurance, the insurance company is going to be billed thousands of dollars because these testing facilities actually have to bill more because they get very little amount from the insurance company in terms of reimbursement. But yes, if you paid out of pocket, they're only about $200 or $300.
Okay, great. Great investment, I would say. We can easily spend that on totaling up your coffees over the course of the year. So
your Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. Right, which is hopefully we're not doing right now. But okay. So given your, vast expertise, I mean, I'm so excited, first of all, to be involved in your Healthy Aging Summit, and that starts in June, early in June. Do you mind, so listeners, she doesn't know I'm asking this, but do you mind sharing, do you have any juicy nuggets or teases that you can pull out and share with listeners to entice us to attend?
Yes, we have so many amazing experts talking about almost any issue you can imagine pertaining to healthy aging. So, for instance, Deborah, your interview was terrific on staying fit and fabulous after 50. The acclaimed sexologist Susan Bratton, she talked about keeping your libido alive and how you can continue to have great sex as you age. So many top-notch doctors talking about various health conditions or diseases that pop up as we get older and how to manage them, such as diabetes and Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, eye diseases like macular degeneration. And since I take a very integrative approach to treatment, I've also chosen expert doctors that also take an integrative or natural treatment approach. So an integrative cancer doctor from Georgia talked about diet and how diet is so important in preventing cancers. I interviewed an herbalist that shared her favorite herbs to promote longevity. A travel expert. We all want to get back out there and start traveling again. So John Ayo, a healthy travel expert, shared his secrets on how we can stay healthy while we're traveling, which is really, really important because we're saving our money, we're making our plans, and the last thing we want to happen is we're on vacation and now we're sick. So he gave a lot of great advice on how to stay healthy while traveling. And then I really had fun with a world-renowned veterinarian who talked about how to keep our pets healthy as they age, because our four-legged friends are part of our family and so important to our health and happiness, and we would do anything to keep them healthy and happy as they age as well. So just an abundance of information on how we can stay healthy, happy, fit, and full of vitality at any age. So I'm very, very excited about it. 49 different experts and just a wealth of knowledge and information.
So good. And I really love that you really have covered all things in so many dimensions of wellness. Like our mental, our emotional, our spiritual, as well as the physical, which I think is, sometimes we really hone in on one. By the way, I have a 12-and-a-half-year-old English sheepdog. I need to talk to that vet right now.
Yeah, she was amazing. Her name is Dr. Judy Morgan, and she's very, very good at what she does, and had great tips on what we should be feeding our animals and how to keep them healthy.
Fantastic. So, Susan, what is the URL where listeners can go and register for the summit?
It's the healthyagingsummit.com.
Perfect. And listeners, I will make sure that that's in your show notes, and also ways that you can connect and follow Susan will be here as well. And the dates for the Healthy Aging Summit, kind of broadly said early in June. Have you got specific dates at this point? I know you've got a lot of speakers.
Yes. So right now it's scheduled to launch on June 4th. However, because we do have 49 speakers, we may end up launching it on June 3rd because typically the summit will run for 4 days, but we're looking at instead expanding it to 5 days. And so the summit will be free for those 4 or 5 days, and it's all virtual, so people can watch the interviews right from the computer, or you also have the opportunity to listen to the interviews on your phone. And so when I've listened to summits before, I often listen to them while I was out walking or in the car or doing something other than sitting in front of my computer. So there are a lot of different ways that you can take in the information.
So good, and I'm so glad you said that because I think that is one of everybody's favorite way to listen to podcasts. And right now, even at home, we're walking a lot, so that's a good thing. So that you know that is an option. And Susan, thanks so much for being here with me today. If there's any question that I missed that I should have asked you, what would that be?
Well, I did want to just talk a little bit about my bones method. I think we kind of got off track with that. So the bones method is a very comprehensive and holistic approach to keeping your bones healthy and strong. And the reason why I called it the bones method is because bones is an acronym. So B stands for balanced nutrition, O stands for optimized digestion, N stands for nurture the soul, E stands for exercise essentials, and S stands for smart supplementation. And so when I work with any person, I go through this method and look at their nutrition. Are they digesting well? Stress and stress reduction. Exercise, of course, exercise is absolutely essential when it comes to building strong bones, and then also their supplementation. And unfortunately, because of our modern farming practices, our food is not as nutrient dense as it used to be. So supplementation is important, but also getting the correct supplementation is critical.
I love that. Thanks so much for the description. I'm so glad you circled back to that. And listeners, if you have a question that we didn't hit or that we triggered from today's podcast, you can leave your question and comment below the show notes at flipping50.com/healthy-aging. And if this was helpful, I'd love it if you'd leave us a rating in iTunes. And be sure you come over to the show notes and click on the link to learn more about Susan Brady's Healthy Aging Summit. And we'll see you there in early June. What are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 together.